Welcome to our Bucky Weekend Call. We're reading and studying and commenting and editorializing on A Fuller Explanation by Amy Edmondson, where she translates or attempts to translate Bucky language into English for normal people, for me. Anyway, okay, so we're excited to be here. Anne, how are you feeling and what are your expectations for today?
Grateful, just very, very grateful. But there's so many things, right? I first and foremost, Steve, thank you so much. You are our curator, literally, because I've been catching up on the things that you sent for last week's meeting from the circle of the explanation for the irrelevancies, the circle of irrelevancies, and then also the you sent a couple more things, so I managed to catch up on them, and also these circles for the from Joe as well. Yeah, so I'm saving all that. But the point is that you have everything at the fingertips. So whenever we talk about something, I mean, yes, we've seen it before, we've discussed them at length and everything, but to be able to pull them out and during our discussion so that we can have a better reference to them, that one is I get blown away by that every time we do that. So thank you very, very much. Okay, the other thing also is from our discussion last week. I actually have been talking, and in the meetings, I've been telling the team, guys, right brain, look at it, listen with your right brain. and then I'll check in with them to see what they actually picked up, and so they're starting to do that. So now we're reminding and kind of getting everybody in the, even if we're not around, to watch out for each other, that they pick up things. And so even my EAs, one of them is really driving me nuts, because she'll only take down notes for like she'll write down stuff that has to do with to do. So when we are doing the like giving the framework or the context and things like this, she never ever writes them down, so I have to check and see, did you write it down? I mean, these are grown adults, and they're not, their pay is really as high as that of that higher than many managers, and I have to ask her, did you write it down? No. Oh my God, I'm like, oh. So anyway, and the context is so critical, and sometimes and she was the one I asked, what did you pick up for yourself, in one of the meetings? I wasn't there and she's representing, right? And she gave me the list and not the things that she really, really needs to know. Then the other thing is also they flip over, the minute you go into talking or dealing with another person in the meet, as long as it's not about them, they flip over to doing and completing a task, that is outside of the discussion, and they switched off from whatever is going on, but then it's relevant to so many of them. It is exhausting, particularly in Asia, even more so. The nuances of relationships and emotions and all that, as a language, we don't use it as much, and so most of them can't even verbalize them, all right? So that's one. So anyway, I'm just saying that I'm just so grateful to be able to use all this, all that we've shared, and and yeah, hi Joe.
Hi.
Thank you so much, Richard. Your the framework as well, the tetrahedron framework. John, thank you so much, and Joe, thank you. The comments, the sharing, etc. I'm just saying that I'm applying many of the things that we're working on. I just haven't gone into the irrelevancies yet, because the table that you sent is making it a lot clearer. And suddenly I can think at different categories, the things that we are experiencing or not experiencing that belong in those, based on those descriptions, Yeah. And so the next step is to take this through with my team, and the fact that 99.9% of the world is invisible, and they're not and exactly the one that just now I was sharing, they don't catch on the context. That is the invisible as well, you know. Anyway, so yes, Richard, how do you feel and what do you expect to take away today?
Well, I'm feeling relatively good. I'm getting over a 3 or 4 day cold, which and my wife has had something similar, and it's taken her a much longer time to get through it. So that's a little bit concerning. And yeah, it's kind of interesting what you're talking about in terms of 99% invisible. And it in some of our kind of work in that suicide prevention area, we've gone from the importance of listening to adding in the importance of hearing. And what's kind of coming through from that is that what's important about hearing is to help you see what you can't see. So it's actually designed to help. That sensory system is designed in some ways to help you see the invisible, see what the eye can't see, because you can hear, you can see through hearing. That's what I'm trying to get at. And I think when you see through hearing, you're often seeing the invisible, or at least you have a metaphor to kind of see the importance of the invisible. But the other thing that's happening is that I'm working with people who are trying to find their voice in terms of talking about their own lived experience with suicide. And it's a voice that has often been suppressed or ostracized or marginalized. And so in this month of suicide prevention around the world, a number of people are trying to bring forward something about their stories. And in listening to some of them and talking with them, I realized in my own mind that there needs to be a preamble, a backstory to why would any one of us tell a very personal story about whatever we're doing or have experienced in our lives.
Sorry.
And that means that when you go back into history, you realize that storytelling is sort of part of the human journey. And that's why it's important to tell stories, whatever they might be, to give voice to, in many cases, those who do not have a voice, but also to give voice to those who can be advocates for either themselves or for others. And so I think it needs to be a drop to why someone would start off telling their story about personal experience. Then today in our World Weavers group this morning, we were talking about stories again, and I had a kind of an epiphany that and that had to do with this whole business of nodes and connections that we so often talking about. And the reference was the story is the glue or the connector in the nodes that we're working with in our lives. So the story is the relationship. The story is the connecting between different points or different things or different nodes. And that was a big revelation for me to be able to think about story as being the tension part of moving forward with our lives or the journeys that we go through. So I'm looking forward to taking more of that away and digesting it through the reading of Amy's fuller explanation book. So, John, how are you feeling, and what do you want to take away from this evening?
Well, I'm feeling fantastic. It's a beautiful day in Perth. I've been for a walk in one of my favourite parks amongst big trees and around lakes. And so that's one of the best starts to the day I can have. I've had a very healthy breakfast, and my wife's in Canberra and coming back tonight. So I'm looking forward to that. I haven't seen her for a couple of weeks. I don't know if I've mentioned to you, but we are merging our firm with a larger firm, and I have three weeks left to complete everything I need to do. And in 3 weeks' time, tomorrow, I'll be sitting in an office in the centre of Perth after 37 years out of the CBD. I'm moving back into the CBD as part of the price of the merger. And the merger is part of my move to semi-retirement to New South Wales in 2.5 years' time. So there's a lot happening in my life. So far in the last 6 months, I've moved home once. I've moved office once. I'm about to move office again. And I'm grateful that I have a fairly high level of resilience, because otherwise I think I'd be overwhelmed. But I was hoping Anne would come back because I wanted to comment on some of the things she said. But I'll go ahead anyway, and she can see it in the recording.
I'm actually here. I've been carrying the iPad over.
Well, we
with
don't
me.
want to see you eating, Anne. We don't want to see you eating, so you can
No,
leave
no,
yourself.
no. Not eating, not. I just went to collect the delivery. That's all. Yes, carry on. I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, good. So one of the things we've learned is that it's important to understand people's modalities and personality profiles, and then ideally to have them understand them. We use a DISC, personality profile, and if people understand whether they're, a D or an S, it helps others to understand them, and it helps them to understand themselves. And then, for example, my wife is a kinesthetic, so I want her to hear me. I have to touch her. If I touch her wrist, I know she'll hear me, but short of contact, most of the time she won't hear me. So if you understand that about other people and they understand that about themselves, it can really improve the level of communication. But I understand what you're talking about, because many people are simply functioning at a visible level and aren't interested in, are often a little scared by the invisible. So I'm hoping to know a little bit more about Bucky and me and life by the end of this session. So that's how I'm feeling. So we see Joe. Joe, how do you feel, and what do you hope to take out of today?
I'm feeling very fortunate. So today was a very good day. And it's very good to see you, John. It's good to see you after a few weeks, and I appreciate the fact that you're actually making the call, because that's a pretty big transition. So, and I'm feeling very, very fortunate. And actually, this invisible is a really interesting idea, and I'm looking forward to exploring that a little bit more. And I was in actually a meeting earlier today about essentially about the virtues, and how it related to some of the founding ideas of the United States. And one of the things that Ben Franklin had talked about was the beauty of silence. And so there's this beauty that exists in a sense that when we're still and we are listening. However, it also reminded me of how fortunate it is to be able to also have friends that are actually willing to listen. And the reason that's so important is, and I didn't bring it up in the meeting, but I really, because it wasn't the direction where the meeting was going, but I did think of Bucky's mistake. So this idea, kind of taking the invisible and making it visible and speaking, but then the mistakes that we make with that, and the charity that actually people can demonstrate sometimes in actually correcting it. So it's it's a really kind of, and it spoke to another virtue is just knowing when, right? Tuning in and tuning out. So with that, it's kind of like anything else. I think it's just one of these things where it really is just a balance of things, and finding right measure, right number of words. And we've talked a lot about simplifying and limiting the number of words that we use. So I think that part is exactly what Richard was kind of talking about, the being able to listen, not only speak, but speak few words. So with that, I very much appreciate everybody listening to my check-in. And Steve, how do you feel? What do you want to take away from today?
I just feel great. And I got to tell you, all my takeaways from your guys' openings, I could leave the call right now. And I have about an hour and a half of work to do to integrate everything that everybody just said. It just boggles my mind. You know, over the last couple of weeks, we've been able to share, I've shared a couple techniques, this idea. The first big epiphany that came to me was the idea that I'd learned last year in our group that only 0.0001% of the universe is visible to me. And that was kind of enlightening. But just in the last couple of weeks, as we've been discussing, it came to me that 99.999% is not visible. That was a huge, like, bing, it was a huge awakening, because I thought it was exciting that that only a small part was visible, but to realize that that much is not visible, it was like a sledgehammer, hit me in the head. So everything we've been saying is just really powerful. Richard, your opening tonight, talking about, because we've been talking about the nodes on the tetrahedron and the lines, and we've been discussing whether those lines are straight or curved, and but for you to describe, and I brought up Stephen Wolfram's diagrams and his videos about the way he's using his computational point of view about the universe to show that these connections are erratic. I mean, they're not just lines or curves, but they're like the electric nodes, but they're like the electric current between Tesla's, his, like a Flash Gordon kind of things. And then for you to bring up tonight that those lines, those connections, the connections between the nodes are tension between the nodes. Boom. That was a powerful epiphany right there. I need to go meditate on that for a couple of days. Those connections are tensions between the nodes. It just at my big epiphany takeaway, Richard, from your share is that lines are simply not an accurate word to communicate what those connections are. And tension is really cool. It really is cool. John, you were talking about, understanding profiles and how you use the personality, some kind of a personality profile indicator when you work with your clients and your people in your office. That is beautiful. In hypnotherapy, I learned one of the techniques, whenever I'm talking to any personality, if I'm doing a hypnotherapy session, of course, I have their eyes are closed because they're kind of in themselves, and I have permission to touch them. And when I want them to get it, even any kind of personality, I'll touch their hand or touch their knee in an inobtrusive way, because I've gotten permission to touch their arm or something, when I want them to hear what is happening. And that kind of like breaks whatever else is going on, and all of a sudden they become present to the moment. And for you to be aware that when you're talking to your wife, that's required in every important communication is profound. Understanding that everybody's a little bit different. Do you want to comment on that, John? You kind of leaned into that, like as if you wanted to add something to that. Do you have anything to add?
Look, communication, we could spend the next months speaking about communication.
Yeah.
The frustration I have sometimes when I can't effectively communicate, and the ease with which you can miscommunicate. It just, I've been doing it a long time, and I still struggle at times.
Yeah.
But that wasn't what I meant. That wasn't what I was saying. And it's even worse sometimes when it's in writing. And I mean, I often think now, if we're going to have a video meeting, as opposed to in the room meeting, because there's so much more invisible communication. Even a good screen and a high-speed connection, there isn't the same level of communication like this as there is when you can feel the person in the room. You can pick up on the energy. And someone like my wife is highly aware of what's invisible, what people are feeling. That's one of the gifts of kinesthetics. And so that whole thing about communication, I sometimes get so frustrated with myself or the people around me. And if people who won't respond, one of the frustrations I have, particularly with somebody with whom I have a close business relationship and a close family member, two different people, they don't respond promptly to my messages. They are not proactive communicators, and that really frustrates the hell out of me. So obviously there's a gift for me to learn out of that, but I struggle so much of the time, because what's more important than our communication and making sure it's accurate and conveying the message I want to convey and accurately receiving somebody else's message and understanding it. Boy, you really triggered me now. You've got me wound up.
You started it. Oh, I guess Anne started it, didn't she? So like, just wonderful. I think that's one of the powers of this group. One of the things we've been talking about that you've missed over the last little while, and I'm going to do more about it, is I've been mentioning some of the chapters I'm writing in my book, and a couple of things we've talked about that Anne mentioned in her flurry of trying to get everything done in a brief intro, is that I've talked about a technique I learned from Stephen Covey about taking notes, that I take notes in 3 columns. One column is what I want to learn, what I'm learning as I'm listening. The other column is what I'm going to teach. Immediately make a note. I've got to mention this to John, or I'm going to mention this to Andrew. The staff needs to know this. And then the other column is what I'm going to do. And so as I'm listening to a communication, if I take the time to break that communication out into 3 different categories, I have 3 different parts of my brain engaged in listening. And even tonight, as I've done your intros, what you'll notice there is I have a bunch of black notes and there's a red, because instead of using 3 columns, I use 3 kinds of ink. And when I take my notes, so I just do my notes and oh, there's a red one. So then I can easily go back and say, oh, what's my red? What's my green? What's my black? And put things together. So by taking notes properly, I increase my ability to listen on different levels and to engage my brain in different parts of my brain. Another thing we talked about is how to listen. And Anne mentioned this, and what I mentioned was, in a group communication, have the person on the right of the person sharing say, what I heard you say was this. And so then the person says, oh, well, that isn't what I said. Well, those are the words you said, but that isn't what I was saying. And then they get a chance to debate the words and come to a clarity. And John, you even said that in your share. You said, well, I said this, but what I was really referring to was this aspect. And you went to further explanation, which is so powerful. So then the person on the left, it kind of a left brain is a loosely metaphor about making sure the right words are being said by the speaker and heard by the listener. And then everybody in the is listening to this communication and learning, oh, I heard this, and what I could have heard was this, and what this person heard was that, and what that person meant to say was this. Suddenly words become more of a painting rather than just, oh, I heard them say that. It's how to listen. Then the person on the right says, wow, when you said this word, you seemed excited. Here's your emotionality. And when you said that word, you actually seemed confused or disappointed. And a lot of times people aren't aware of how words affect their own emotionality and their own, and how clearly words express a commitment. I mean, John, as an attorney, each of us, because we're leaders, each of us have seen people talk to us saying, yes, I'm going to do this. And we know they are lying to themselves. We know they're not going to do it. They just say they are, but we can see we don't see them in the space. I'm sure you've all experienced that, leaders here. So, and then you guys inspired me, because how to take notes helps me listen. How to listen is the emotionality and the words. But the third thing that came up as you guys were talking was I don't know what it is. I'm not sure. My notes are weird here, but it was like this idea of visible and not visible, as we've discussed it in several aspects. This is one way to understand Bucky's concept of convex and concave. I think that's one good metaphor of convex and concave. Here's what I'm gravitated to. concave. But here's what I'm getting, radiation convex, and so there's that what I see and what I don't see. And I need to be aware of both of those things simultaneously, but I tend to focus on what I see. I don't know. It's kind of you got this.
Can I interject there? You talked about Stephen Covey earlier, and then you talked about communication and knowing people aren't going to do what they're saying.
Yeah.
I think that one of the great books is Stephen Covey Jr.'s The Speed of Trust.
Yes.
Everybody worked through it. It's amazing because there are little exercises in there for you. Basically, how trustworthy are you, and how trustworthy do you find the people with whom you're in relationship? And of all the things that are critical, trust is a foundation, because it's so hard to build and so easy to lose. And having a strong foundation of trust in relationships will carry you through the most extreme situations, or otherwise the relationship will break down. And one of the things I've become more aware of with the years is the extent to which I can trust myself and the extent to which I can trust those around me.
Wow, that's an important thing, John. I've been. Go ahead.
Sorry. Steve, go ahead first.
No, go ahead, Anne. I haven't finished my intro yet, and we're just kind of jamming right now. Let's continue to jam. This is really good. Go ahead, Anne.
Have you read the book Tribal Leadership? Have you come across that one? Okay, it's an American book as well, Tribal Leadership. And it depends on where we are at different times of our lives. We can shift, it can move, but okay, it's actually the thinking and the words that come out and how they perceive the world, right? I can't recall what the first level is, but the first level, I can't recall the terms, because my children are the one who read it, and but I roughly know what it's about. People who are in the first level, they're everything, the world is against them, and those are the ones who can get into crime and so on, and they would take drugs and so on, because just the world is horrible and it is completely against them. It's me against the entire world. Now, I can't recall the second level, but the third level is, it's like, the wording they use is, why does it always have to be me? Yeah, and they use that a lot. And then there's a tendency for them to think that only they are, like, I got to do it all by myself again. These people all can't do it. That mentality is at stage 3 of tribal leadership. And then stage 4 would be the one that is, they think of the world. It's a we thing. It's a we thing. It's about a whole team and everybody. It's like, we can do this. Okay. But the we is still a group, and that there's still other people who can't do it. And the 5th stage of tribal leadership is like, whatever you're doing is radiating out to the world. Okay, so a majority of people are at stage 3 of tribal leadership. Okay, and those who are doing big things and like for their organizations and the group around them, that's at stage 4, but they're more inclusive. Stage 5 is like completely inclusive of the world. Whatever you're doing is all out there, and it's for people to pick up and learn, etc. Yeah. So anyway, that's what the book is called, just in case you would be interested. And then they also talk about how to move people, from one level to the next and so on. That one I've not read that book, so I don't have the details on that one. Okay. Thanks. Over to you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you for adding that in. To me, this is the value of these meetings, is our individual sharing and our perspective. When we just read all the words, I can read all the words myself. What I can't do is get into John's brain and Anne's brains and Richard's brain and Joe's brain. And so, John, I wanted to add to this understanding of profile. Over the weeks, we've talked about, and when we ended up with synergetics, I've suddenly learned, and I'm still contemplating and pondering the significance of the chronophile. In other words, I look at a person's personality, how they communicate, how I'm communicating, how I'm taking notes, how I'm setting up my priority. But that chronophile, if I understand that bio, what what is my chronology? What is my background? What have I engaged with? What problems have I solved that bring me to my present perspective? You know, if my chronophile says that I landed a rocket ship on the moon, then if I'm in a group and I say, well, here's the benefits of a rocket engine, somehow that comment should be prioritized over anybody else's idea because I landed on the frickin' moon. And if I don't know that if nobody knows I landed on the moon, then my comment's going to be just as carry equal weight with the guy who just got up this morning and says I hate talking about outer space. You know, and comments can be weighted by the chronophile if we will take the time to understand it. Look at the bio, and before we judge a communication, find that context. This is what I learned from Bucky on chronophile. Go ahead, John.
Steve, there's a game called the survival game. Has anybody played it? You're in a team. You're given a hypothetical situation. You know, you're stranded on a desert island, whatever. You're given certain items to choose from, and you've got to determine the priority of them and how you survive in that situation. And my wife and I have done this a few times. And on one occasion, she was with a group and she didn't feel she had the right to speak up. And so the end result was they rate you when you've decided what items you're going to select out of the group and how you're going to survive. And you either survive or you don't, you die. And on one occasion in her team, they died, but you do your own personal assessment. So you've got a record of how you would solve the problem. And then there's a group. And the ideal is that together the group achieves a better result than any one single member because you've got synergy. But if people don't speak up, and especially when they've got the experience, and if you survive but the group dies, then you've got something to answer for because you didn't speak up and you often didn't convince the group of why they should give weight to your views. And so it's what you were saying, it's earn the right or it's established personal credibility, whatever. But it's good to do the example where there might be 10 people in a group. They do their own assessment of how they'd survive, and then there's a group, and often the more forceful will dominate and determine the group's response, which can lead to death rather than survival, whereas individual members might have survived. So it's related to what you were saying. Yes, establishing personal credibility in the situation.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. And if I don't take the time to build that context and build that understanding as I go, if I don't take the time to find out who I'm talking to in a series of conversations, when that critical moment comes, I'll have no idea whose input should I prioritize, right? I played a game, and I used to conduct these in a kind of a LifeSpring or a landmark kind of workshop. I have a workshop called Opportunities that was based on LifeSpring landmark technologies. And we had a thing called the lifeboat. And we would do this closed eye process where several days in a row, we'd go out and close our eyes and take a boat trip to an island and find a treasure and give it to ourselves, right? And so I'd invite everybody to close their eyes, and everybody thinks, oh boy, I'm going to go to an island and get a treasure. And they go out, and we closed out, and for about a minute of great music, and all of a sudden, bam, there's a crash. And we just announce everybody to wake up suddenly and say, hey, the boat just hit an iceberg. There's 30 people in the room. We only got 20 lifeboats. And now it's time to decide who's going to get on the lifeboats. Whoa, that is a hugely powerful process, including the idea, do I save myself a seat, and why not? What is it about me that does not save myself a seat? And if I don't know who the best people are, I'm just going around. I mean, it's a great process. I have chills now. Has anybody done a lifeboat process like that? Have you? Yeah.
Bawled my eyes out.
Oh, did you? I would, if we had time, I'd talk about my daughter went, and the instructor was a complete numbnut, and that was the first time I'd experienced it. And I allowed things to happen that I would not allow to happen in my own workshop, because it's a very powerful moment. And my daughter was like 14, and the person who was the leader was a complete jerk. Anyway, I got, hey, listen, I've clicked on your link, and what a beautiful link. I hope everybody clicks on that link on tribal leadership. And it's a beautiful outline and a wonderful thing to do. So while we were talking, I remembered my epiphany today, because not only have I talked about how to take notes and how to listen, but I also have a section in my book on how to do. And it's about listing my needs and wants, and then prioritizing my needs and wants into A, B's, and C's. And then it's taking all the B's and moving them either to A's or C's, and then putting the C's in the drawer so I only have A's. Now I'm only going to do A's, and this is the key that most those other things people have used techniques like that, and I can go into more detail. But once I have my list of A's, here's a secret I learned. I list them, and I learned this from Paul J. Meyer in a course called Dynamics of Personal Leadership. Paul J. But I categorize them based on ease of accomplishment and desirability. So if my A's, these are very important things I got to do today. I categorize them ease of accomplishment. I give very easy things a 10 and very hard things a 0. And then desirable. If it's very desirable, I give it a 10. If it's not desirable, I give it a 0. I add those two scores together and I pick the A's based on the highest score because it's easy and desirable. And the further down on the list I go, the less easier it is, the less desirable it is. And most people, when they pick their A's, they pick the most discouraging, terrible thing, and then they don't do it and it wrecks their day. You know, but when you pick something that's easy and desirable and you get it done, it feels like a victory. And it was an A, right? So that's an epiphany I had that I'm going to talk more about. And you guys are great because I've been wondering, I got a section in my book on extreme speech and language and how those things affect, how words affect my efficiency. So there's some feedback. Joe, you mentioned this. I've got notes from everybody here in your openings. It's just mind-boggling. And I think that there's a vibe in the air, and that's part of the invisible context, because out of the clear blue sky, Joe talks about silence. Well, he could have talked about 5 other things. I'm sure that if somebody had said next to Joe and said, Joe, don't talk about silence, talk about the next thing on your list of priority, he'd have something else that'd be just as powerful. But he talked about silence, and so this rings a bell for me, you guys. On October 9th, I'm going into Vipassana. Vipassana is a 10-day meditation with a 9-day vow of silence. I'm going in Wednesday night, and I'm going to be gone from October 9th to October 20th. This means I'm going to miss Saturday, October 12, 13, and Saturday, October 19, 20. Joe's kind of volunteered to be the host when I'm not available. Joe, will you please make sure that you're available those days, and let's coordinate so that I can give you my passcodes and you can get into Zoom and you can be Steve. And then also I'll be gone on Wednesday the 16th. So if you could do Wednesday the 16th as well. All right. And this, if you hadn't said silence, I'd have forgot about it. But I'm going into a 9-day vow of silence, and this is the perfect time to bring it up and to have everybody be aware of that.
Hello, silence, my old friend.
Is what?
Yeah, that's right.
Come to visit you again. Or is it you've come to visit me again? Which is it?
No, I've come to visit you again. Yes, Simon and Garfunkel, I've come to visit you again.
Oh, yeah. Hello, silence, my old friend. Listen, this will be my 33rd 9-day vow of silence that I've been ending. And I got to tell you, I almost have tears in my eyes. It's the most loving thing I've done for myself, is to sit and just listen to all the conversations that just drive me crazy all day long. I have a conversation, I get up and do something stupid. And in that workshop, I have a conversation. I can't get up and do something stupid. I have to sit there for another 9 days, right? And so what happens is I evolved to a higher and higher level of understanding of what that's about. Wow, it's very powerful. So, Joe, please mark your calendar for those dates.
Yep.
Okay, good. And that kind of finishes my intro. Any other comments or questions before we get started? That's a 43-minute intro, everybody. Wow.
It was worth it. It was worth it.
It really is.
And I will use the other portion for the ending, so you know we don't get stretched.
That's right.
Give us plenty of time to end, okay, Steve?
Boy, I didn't hear that. What?
So start preparing for the ending 43 minutes before the end.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? I've been so excited about everything I've listened to. I have not got the Saturday reading up here yet. Any other comments and questions though before I find that? Okay,
I have a lot, so yeah, but
have a lot.
it's I'll just say
All right,
that.
it's coming up right now. We are on page
9.
9 of the book. And that page 9 is called Experimental Evidence. And let me think here. Page 9 is, I don't want to add a comment there. What page am I on? Comments. I wish I were. See, the trouble is okay, good. The trouble is that the PDF file is not the same as the book. Here we go. I'm approaching it now. Here we go. Experimental evidence. And let's share. Okay. Thank you for your patience, everybody. I could have been more prepared. There's no
No.
shoulds.
Don't worry, don't worry.
Don't shoot on yourself.
Exactly.
All right.
Okay, here we go. Experimental evidence. And okay, good. Some more on Eddington. Wonderful. Okay. John, do you want to read?
Happy to read, yes.
Yeah, okay, good. You're our appointed narrator. Go for it.
It seemed to Fuller that mathematicians arbitrarily invent impossible concepts, decide rules for their interaction, and then memorize the whole game. But what did he propose as an alternative? Starting from scratch. Mathematical principles must be derived from experience. Start with real things, observe, record, and then deduce. Working with demonstrable, as opposed to impossible, concepts, the resulting generalizations would reflect and apply to the world in which we live. It seemed highly likely that such an experimental approach would lead to a comprehensive and rational set of principles that represented actual phenomena. Furthermore, Bucky suspected that such an inventory would relate to metaphysical as well as physical structures. Fuller decided that to begin this process of rethinking mathematics, he had to ask some very basic questions. What does exist? What are the characteristics of existence? He proposed that science's understanding of reality should be incorporated into new models to replace the no longer appropriate cubes and other solids that had kept mathematicians deliberately divorced from reality since the days of ancient Greece.
John, hang on for 1 second if you can. I was just listening to a podcast with Lex Friedman and Michio Kaku. And Michio Kaku was talking about how when he was a kid, 12 years old, he heard about this great scientist who did not finish a manuscript. And he said, how could a great scientist not finish a manuscript? And this bugged him. And so because of that, he got into science. And the scientist ended up being Einstein. And the manuscript that Einstein didn't finish, there were 2 that he did finish. One got him a Nobel Prize. It was on quantum, the theory of quantum theory. They got him a Nobel Prize. The other was the theory of relativity, which is so unprovable, although demonstrably practical, that there's been no Nobel Prize for the theory of relativity. And the third principle was the one that he didn't finish, which was the grand unified theory. And he studied this out. And Einstein said, I got a vision of the first 2. I could see models right in my head, practical applications of how these things worked, like hearing the sound go by in a train. And that's how he came up with the theory of relativity, the speed of light, and things like that. But that third model, the unified theory of everything, he did not see a workable model for it. And it's very interesting that here's Einstein talking about the same thing Fuller's talking about, right? Practical things in front of me that create an invitation to go deeper. I just thought that was profound. Thank you for allowing me to share that. Any other thoughts or comments before we continue reading? Okay.
To begin with,
Yeah.
there are no solids. Matter consists exclusively of energy. things are actually events, transient arrangements of frenetically vibrating atomic motion. It's almost unthinkable, but perhaps if we get our vocabulary and models to be more consistent with an energy event reality, children can become comfortable with the invisible discoveries of science. In short, simplifies Fuller, we have the option to tell children the truth about nature in the first place. What if we do go along with the rule that mathematics should not depend upon a concept that cannot be demonstrated? Where does that leave us? Fuller saw inconsistencies even in the notion of an imaginary straight line, for imagination relies on experience. Imagination, he would say, to construct its images. Therefore, an operational mathematics must rely on concepts that correspond to reality. Bucky pulls us back into the turn of the century schoolhouse of his childhood. The teacher stood at the blackboard, made a little dot, and said, "This is a point. It doesn't exist." So she wiped that out. Then she drew a whole string of them and called it a line. Having no thickness, it couldn't exist either. Next, she made a raft out of these lines and came up with a plane. I'm sorry to say it didn't exist either, sighs Bucky. She then stacked them together and got a cube, and suddenly that existed. Telling the story, Bucky scratches his head as if still puzzled 70 years later. I couldn't believe it. How did she get existence out of non-existence to the fourth power? So I asked, how old is it? And she said, don't be naughty. It was an absolute ghost cube.
Mm.
This is quoted from, you want to read that footnote?
Yes, quoted from Epic 43-hour videotaped lecture session, Everything I Know, recorded over 10 days in January 1975. See bibliography and other resources for details, hereinafter cited as EIK video. Or it's EIK, yep.
Any other questions, comments before we continue?
Yep. I
Right.
don't know what. Okay, I've got something to add here. I'm not sure if I mentioned
Me
these
too.
before. Okay, because this one of the things that we did in our school was we actually deconstructed math. And we started from the end as per the book, right? That we wrote. We actually, all subjects, we deconstructed them and we started from the end and we kind of worked backwards, right? So for math, we also have to have the support of this math called Mortensen math. Did I ever bring that up?
Oh, no.
Okay. Mortensen math was developed by an American. His name is Jerry Mortensen, and he developed it actually for Montessori, the schools, right? And a lot of people do not know that Montessori system was from it's an education system from 2 years old all the way up to diploma. So what went around the world was the Montessori system for kindergarten, right? So anyway, he created this math program called Mortensen Math, and everything he did was visible, and you could, and you're teaching from concrete to the abstract, right? So anyway, I got to learn this when I went out to Singapore. My sister, she's an engineer. I'm a non-math inclined person. And I was struggling to teach my children math. They couldn't understand what the teachers were doing in school. And then I was freaked out because I'm like, if they don't know what they're doing, I'm not a math person. And here I am teaching them and making them understand better than the math teacher. So I was complaining to my sister. She said, come over, because there's a mathematician from Australia. His name is, I would think he would have passed on already. His name was Sandy Sanderson, right? And so he was training Mortensen math. And so you're learning from discovery and concrete, right? So we've actually curated our curriculum now all the way from kindergarten using the basis with Mortensen. Even, can you imagine, algebra is concrete? Okay, you can teach kids distance, area, and volume in half an hour. The whole concept of distance, area, and volume in half an hour. And other things like doing skip counting, you know. So the minute you do skip counting, so he talks about rectangles all the time. But this is really, and Bucky is right, these are not real because you don't find this in nature. But anyway, whatever it is, we've curated a program where the students discover, but then we have added stuff because his alone is not sufficient. So if we were to teach the kids measurement, we don't start off with millimeters and centimeters, you know. We actually get kids to just take whatever they want and go measure whatever you want, right? If they so choose to use their eyelash to measure stuff, so be it. You know, if they use a pen, and so be it. So they would go around measuring things around the school. And then we come back and we ask them to tell their friends to, you know, maybe a hair long, how many hair, you know, strands long, or the pencils, and they would find that the measurements are not the same, right? And that's why we go into why people come up with systems of measurement so that across the world we use the same language, right? But we do that. And my sister, she discovered this thing about concrete and abstract, that kids need to learn from concrete to abstract, and yet language and alphabets and numbers and math, they're all abstract, you know, and nobody goes down to turning into concrete first before it goes into abstract. All the symbols for math, they're all abstract, you know. And what we found out from Mortensen is that young people, their understanding of abstract concepts becomes strong only when they're 16. Okay, so here we are insisting children at 2 years old understanding addition, subtraction, and even 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 100. That is not concrete, right? So when they do 2 plus 3 and all that, my sister actually had to do with her daughter when she was about 2 or 3 with sweets, and you know, this is 2, this is 3, and then she starts to cover them up once she gets the idea of 5, you know. Then she will cover 2, and she'll cover 2, then she'll say 3, and then you know, how many more to 5, or then I give you 2 more. But she would take it step by step to do that. And so we've used it in our schools as well. Everything they're learning is as concrete as we can make it, and we let them discover. So things like what is that again? Oh my God, your 3, 4, 5 hypotenuse, is it the that thing? Yeah, whatever it's called. Yeah, so we actually get the kids to discover that. Then we also teach them the basis of all calculations of area. So then they understand outside of the circles, all it's in the form of rectangle. So you got to get to that rectangle, right? The minute you get that, then that's where the division, like you can have length times breadth divided by 2, that kind of thing, where it comes from. So we actually get them to use paper. So everything, we make it as concrete as we can, including, you know, x minus 3 bracket and x minus 3. I actually had to ask my sister, the engineer, is there any word problem or mathematical calculation with the word problem that will allow you to get to that statement? And I got her, I said, you're the engineer, can you go search? So because we do have access to Malaysian education, Singapore, UK, Australia, America, so she went and searched, and she could not find a word problem that would show up as x minus 3, x minus. So I said, can you actually give me a situation in life where so I'm the non-math inclined person, so I'm trying to understand. So she would really take the trouble to figure it out, and she did, using an example of a piece of land and the developer. And I can't for the life of me explain to you how that works, but she made it work for me. And so we make sure these things were done with the children so that they're not counting things that don't make sense. Okay, and we always, math and science, number one in our school. And the teachers can be very, very stubborn because of the way they were taught. you know. And so they have to start from the end. Everything they have to start from the end. Show the kids what the end is, because the beginning is the most boring, right? So we got to show them the end, and we work backwards as to why we need to know this, but we get them excited, or to see the tragedy behind it, to see the wonderment, yeah, there. If there's none, that's not the end. You got to get the right end. And it can be depending on people's experiences, you know. So just to share, exactly when I read Bucky and what he's saying, oh my God, it's so true. And now, and that's so timely, because on Monday I'm having a meeting with my heads and managers, and I realized that oftentimes they reduce the vision or the purpose, which is really big, down to something they can manage. And so what is that big purpose and that big vision gets lost along the way as they train other leaders, other teachers coming out. So we're doing a sort of an alignment meeting on Monday. I give you an example. Say for language, this is on my part, right? We are not training Malaysians to become second language learners, as what our curriculum is based on in Malaysia is second language. And nobody ever learns, like, you don't do second language to get to first language. None of the native speakers do that. You go first language, pum, bang, you're right there. So that was my struggle as a teacher, you know, trying to figure that out. You don't do that. And I realized that we didn't learn English from young, you know, doing that. So then there was a different purpose as to what we're doing. And in Malaysia, doing that curriculum, if you look at statistics, okay, so that's why, Joe, I shared what you shared, which is logic based on, was it your words were? Logic in relation to reality. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So logic is students have grammar problems.
Right.
So they teach grammar. None of us who's, you know, at this level know grammar. Okay.
Right.
And many in UK and US, you don't start learning from grammar, right? We can see that. And yet there's no reality in relation to the logic of what they're teaching. And they're teaching grammar still in college. I'm freaking out on this, you know. So, and it's hard to change a whole continent of people doing this. It's really, really tough. So anyway, that's one. And for me, the purpose of what we're doing for English is this. We need all students to be 100% strong. And to get, right now, it's only 20% whose language is really, really strong in Malaysia, really, really strong, like a native speaker. Second is you need to be able to know language well and be able to write it really, really well, to the point when you write or you say something, people go, wow, which is what I get here, you know. Third, and Bucky and so on. Third one is, so the percentage drops when you can do these two things. Third one is presentation. When you speak and you stand up there, people will, wow, I got a lot of takeaways from you. It's really worth my time, yada, yada. So a person who can do all three now drops down to 5%. Actually, I'm being optimistic here. But to do these three and think, it drops down 2% or less. This is what we are doing with the language. So I realized that purpose is different from what our curriculum set out to do. And when they try to change it out to something they're familiar, then they're reducing it back down to having only 20% whose English is strong. You get where I'm going, right? So I started from the end, and then we do from the beginning. Everything is like it's life. It's not theory. It's not and so on. So when I just read that part, my God, so timely, I'm going to be using Bucky to help me convince the rest of my people. Okay, thank you.
It's really incredible on so many different levels of how all of this. One is just actually related to the beginning. In the sense that when we were talking a little bit earlier, specifically in reference to even what John was saying, deconstruction and construction, or how we can actually be destructive with words in certain cases, and actually construct with things. And the only thing is, if you come back to what just was read with Amy, is this idea of what is it, what does exist, and what are its characteristics, right? So then when you're labeling, coming to, kind of, and this comes back to what you're saying and about concretes, you start with a concrete, this experiential, and you're going through and you're deconstructing it. And you're deconstructing it in a way, and you're saying, what is it? And then once you deconstruct it, you have an understanding of it. And then more importantly, because you know what it is, you can ask, why is it in existence? And that's how you start to be able to construct models that replace the old models. So that's exactly where, now if you think about it in terms, and it's just one that I have, there's a lot to say, even what everybody has said just links to this text directly. But one of the things that I would say is that how we go from abstract to concrete, and that disconnection that we have in education. And I actually think that has a direct impact on how we interact with one another. I mean, without a doubt, is that things have become, once you have an abstraction, if you think about it in terms of even monetary money, it's an abstraction, right? And once you have a distance from the actual transaction, then that is a way of we're distancing ourselves from the concrete, from the actual interactions, and therefore it becomes much easier to not be concerned with the outcome. So everything is an abstract concept, as opposed to being more of a concrete, where we're actually interacting and doing something and seeing what it's like and understanding it, understand why it exists to begin with. And I think that that's absolutely the wrong way to go, is meaning going from the abstract to the concrete versus the concrete to the abstract. And there's a lot of reasons as to, I can go as to why I think that is. Because, there's a lot there. I mean, I could go on a long time about this, because everything that was said, even in the check-in, even when you were talking about Steve, I learned, I think I do, and how that actually relates directly to what we're saying here. I'll just end with this. I mean, because there's a lot. I can put the simplicity by which what Amy has just said, and it is profound. You can use this as a way to teach Bucky in schools. And I mean, this is really, I think this is a concrete, what is something, you start to ask yourself these questions. You have this book, you put it in someone's hands, and they go out and they experience the world. But they start to ask the right questions. And I would say that this is why, and in Bucky's ideas, can have a huge impact on education, as far as kind of just the way it's executed. I'll just say that. And even just understanding things along the lines of what is energy, or reimagining what really is, what's accounting, what's being counted, why is it being counted, those types of things. those are all ideas that we can start to ask ourselves, but you have to start to experience the world and deconstruct things in order to really understand them. Anyway, I was a little all over the place because there's a lot to cover. Anyway, Richard's going to go.
Richard is
Okay.
Richard's ended up for a while, John.
Yep.
Unless you want to say something directly about this conversation, then Richard can open a door to something new. John, are you commenting just on this?
Yeah, very quickly, a theme through all this, your silence, Anne's comments. Up until fairly recently, our education system was based on the perfection model. You got it right or you got it wrong. Only relatively recently we introduced the discovery model, and there are still places where people are wrong, they're a failure, and that's not how to learn. And it goes back to your bit about silence. I mean, isn't it the Bible that says, and the word became flesh and dwelt amongst us? So first you have a thought, then you give voice to the thought, and then you can make it a reality. But it's the way we see it. I'm thinking of Edison. Didn't Edison say, when he was questioned about, didn't he feel he was a slow learner after trying 10,000 ways that didn't work? He said, no, I discovered 9,999 ways that don't work. So it's how you see failure, how you see education. It's also interrelated.
Yeah.
So sorry, yes, Richard.
Well, before that, I want a clarification, John. You said protection model as opposed to what model?
No, perfection.
Perfection model.
You get 100 out of 100, you're perfect.
And what's the other model? What's the alternative model?
Discovery, the discovery model, where children are encouraged to explore.
And we actually have talked about that. Anna's brought it up in the last couple of weeks, the discovery models. Thank you very much. I wanted that point of clarification. Any other point of information or clarification before we turn it over to Richard?
No.
Okay. Go ahead, Joe.
I'll just say really quickly, the right and wrong aspect of things is also how we act in our political system. And then we don't look at the in-between. We don't look at the in-between. And then therefore, that's where that anyway, I won't go on about that either, but that's exactly the same behavior that manifests itself. In other words, that type of thinking doesn't enable construction.
Cool. Richard, the door is yours, my friend. Go for it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for your patience.
I go back to the sentence that John started with, or the paragraph. It started with the sentence, to begin with, there are no solids. And then he goes on from there. And my curiosity is, ever since I've become familiar with that, and also the notion of building blocks and relativities, that sentence, wherever it's written, is glossed over. And we don't really come in and say, well, wait a minute, what do you mean there are no solids? And if there are no solids, then what is there? And then we can also even ask the question about what's the difference or the similarity between the notion of solid and concrete. And we've just spent a number of minutes talking about the importance of being concrete as opposed to abstract. So I come back to this. Why do we gloss over the fact that there are no solids and keep using the language of solids? People are always talking about being in solidarity with each other, as if there's a solid. So that's my concern every time I go through this kind of book or Bucky's work and sets out this, there's no solids. So do we believe it? And if we believe it, why don't we talk or behave as if we believe it? Yeah, go ahead, John.
Bucky went on a lot about language. After he'd not spoken for, I forget whether it was 2 or 3 years, he started speaking again. And he said, I would rather be not understood than misunderstood. And he said, we lie to ourselves and our children every day. We talk about sunrise. We talk about sunset. We talk about standing up. We're not standing up. We're standing out from the planet. So there are two things here. First of all, the meaning of language changes with time in some cases. And the other thing is that it's very hard and often causes confusion amongst those we're communicating with. When I talk about sun sight and sun clips, people look at me. What's he talking about? Or if I talk about standing out, they think I'm saying I'm outstanding. So I'm having myself on. But if you go back to the Bible, one of the things that really epitomizes this for me, in the Psalms, David said, I prevented the rising of the sun. So was he saying he actually had the power to stop the sun rising? No, because the original meaning of prevent was to come before. Two Latin words, pre and venio, I came before. But through military usage, the meaning changed, because if you came before, you took the high ground, you prevented the enemy. So the meaning of prevent changed from coming before, which is the sense David was using it in, to I took the high ground, therefore I stopped the enemy. But we still talk about prevent as stopping something. So we've let go of its origins and it's got a new meaning. And so language is so important, but we don't teach our children about that side of language. We give them meanings which have often changed, but we shouldn't be talking about sunrise because it's suggesting the sun's moving when in fact we're orbiting around it. So it's a good question. Why have we not discounted the notion of solids? Perhaps that's an important part of education. Perhaps we should be devoting more of education to giving children a more realistic understanding of the universe than our current use of language does. What do you think, Anne?
Yeah, for sure. Because and I think in over here is really missing and even worse. So yeah, the use of language for sure.
Well, even in our discussions, to kind of reflect a little bit on the two words, the reference to no solids in the text, and Anne's reference to concrete, and so is there an overlap in the way in which we kind of conceptualize concrete? Because concrete to me comes across as solid. But if there's no solids, does that mean there's no concrete in a synonym sort of way? And if that's so, why do we make this distinction between concrete and abstract as if one is bad and the other is good? Without taking into account the kinds of things that Anne was saying earlier about when we're ready to kind of accommodate and appreciate abstract and concrete. There's a developmental sort of time period in here as well. But it's just interesting for me, and this discussion is the sentence that refers to solids and the commonality of using solidarity as a way to say we're all together, common cause, that sort of idea. And
what we mean to say is we're on the same vibration.
That's right. We understand pattern, or we understand network, or there's a connective of something that's going on that's holding us together in a way that feels like it's solid when it's when it's porous.
And I think what John said about time is actually a really important point. How things at one moment in time can be captured, and how that, because I think what we're ultimately talking about here is change, right? And how does change then occur? So when we say there's no solid or no concrete, you have a concept, right? And what is the characteristics of the concept? You're drawing a boundary. You're saying it is something, right? So it is something at a point in time, but it's not permanent. It's not something that it's permanent if it's written down technically, but it's not permanent in how we experience in its existence. So the idea of concrete, you have to, whenever you have a concept, you're having a set of characteristics, you're drawing a boundary, and you're deciding what an object actually is. And whenever you're doing that, well, I mean, that's a solid, but it's not permanent. And it's not within time. I mean, you could say it's like, in a sense, but I mean, it's not, kind of in the sense that you can take it apart and put it together again as something else.
Well, Joe, in some ways, so I'm not to be disrespectful, but when one can say that it's solid, but it's not permanent, is some people call that weasel words.
Yes, fair. That's fair.
And,
that's a good. Go ahead.
It still brings us back to our belief at one point that there is a basic building block, there is a basic solid, and
right. That was what I was about to get to. Actually, yeah. There's this. The tetrahedron is actually really meaningful here.
Well, but it's just that conceptual idea that there are solids, and in science there's something has moved us along, and maybe even the indigenous science has been there for a long time, basically saying there is no solid in that Western science point of view. It's all kinship. It's all it's all my relatives. We're all connected. But somehow or another, the Western world people have become comfortable with the notion of solid. And whenever we want to speak to that in terms of we got to get together and fight for something, etc., we use the language of solidarity. And all I'm saying is that even in our kinds of readings, with our kinds of sensitivity to language and so forth, when we read a sentence like that, we tend to gloss over it. And don't come back and say, well, wait a minute, what is he really saying? I mean, if there's no solid, well, what is there then? And what should we be referring to if we can't use the word solid? Because there are no solids.
Right.
Wasn't Newtonian physics a major contributor to this? Because the language of Newton and his successors disconnected us from our origins and our country, our connection with nature. Who was it? Was it Newton or one of the others at his time who said nature's secrets are to be tortured from her? Somebody used that language.
That was Bacon.
Bacon, yes. Yeah, I mean, they lost awareness of and respect for nature and our connection with nature in the way Indigenous peoples have it. And they saw it, there's nature and there's us, and we are to control nature, which is a nice attempt, talk about an ego trip, control nature. But yes, the grip of those concepts on our minds and on a number of generations, we're still struggling to shake free from them.
Okay, John, I was thinking about the question you asked, right? And commenting on what has been discussed. And yes, actually, science has become bigger than nature. Science is just our way of learning about how nature works. This is a little bit of nature, whereas the way education has done it, it's like science is bigger than nature. And you're absolutely right about the language, and we get disconnected from it. And this the thing that I'm grappling with as well. First and foremost, a lot of people don't keep up with the sciences, and the things that are changing and how it's impacting them. As I go through our meetings every Wednesday and Sunday, that has become even clearer, right? So the whole idea of scarcity, abundance, and the world being abundant, and so on, just that alone is impacting us so badly. So languaging. The other one is, I did talk to my science people to try this. They went to class and got the kids talking about the actual facts. That's what real science is and the words they're using. They got nowhere with it when they came back. So I did report on that one because we really got nowhere, because they have to actually go through a Bucky in order to be able to take it to any level of to have something that's more that you have the depth to the discussion. So it's very, very surface level when they were doing it, and so we got nowhere with it. And so anyway, for where the disconnection happens, okay, this solid thing, yeah, that's the one I want to talk about. The solid thing is, okay, because it's language, right? It's language. I realized from, the word pollution, right? And how Bucky calls it leftovers. Just like pollution, I think the word solid needs to have one or two more definition.
Right.
Okay. Because a word, we use it for so many things. Like the word solid alone, this is solid, this is great, right? This is something great. So there's so many meanings to it. And some of them have got, I know of some, if you look up the dictionary, there could be even up to 15 different meanings for that word, the usage of the word alone. So the word solid then, for us calling ourselves solid, is one of the definitions. And then you just need to add a few more definitions to the word solid as per the fact that there is no solid. Yeah, because by right, if you're looking at the atoms or particles or whatever, we should be able to walk through each other or walk through things, right? That was what I found out, yes, from getting more involved reading Dr. Michio Kaku, yes. So I sat through his entire book, Physics of the Future, wow, the heck out of me, etc. So anyway, it's actually the definition. We need to add more current definitions to, like right now, even what they're adding, it's really not based on science, which is what is missing right now in people curating the newer definitions for it. I don't know whether that makes any sense at all.
I mean, I think it does. I mean, because the concept, how the concept can be misconstrued. And I think that's a very important point to because saying no solid exists, right? Well, that means, like, okay, I get what that means in the sense that the way we're using it, and I agree with that. It's like almost saying there's a right and wrong. There's when we're even having discussions about events, political events. There's right and wrong. It's black and white. Yeah, I mean, I get the idea of this idea of solid, but that the concept that something is solid isn't necessarily, then you have to have a concept of what solid actually is, right? So what is it then? If it's not in existence, what is it? Like, so and so that's where this kind of comes in this idea that if you say a minimum system of tetrahedron, this is a solid, right? Then a solid is then, like, Richard's shaking and is talking. You're on mute, Richard. Richard.
You're on mute, Richard.
Richard,
So we
you're on
can't
mute.
hear you. I
Oh,
think
good.
you're needing you to interrupt him, but you're on mute. Is that
Yeah,
true,
I
Joe?
think
You're
you're-
inviting
That's good.
people up?
Otherwise, I was probably going to sound impolite. Yeah.
That's quite all right. There's no impolite.
No, what I was just trying to say is that I think very often the meaning of solid means it's opaque. Uh, but if I go back to Platonic solids and you picture whether it's the tetrahedron or the cube or whatever as a Platonic solid, what you're relating to, by and large, it seems, are the faces. And so you see them closed, and that represents solid. So it could be a solid tetrahedron, a solid cube. And so it's the other thing that we'll see in what we just read too is that Fuller started talking about changing the language of point or line, I should say, to vector. And then the points become the vertex. And when you connect the vertex through a vector to another vertex, you can create a cubical form or a tetrahedral form. But now your eye sees the corners and the lines or the vectors between. And so it'd be kind of, I don't know whether this is something that Anne can do in their class. If you want, if kids were to build an opaque sort of cube, and so you see, well, that's often what we think of solid. And if they built a corner or a vector or a vertex and vector structure, so it's sort of wireframe, then you can see that, well, that's a pattern or a network. And now the kids can actually see, oh, okay, a Platonic solid means it's this sort of opaque, focused on the faces. And the other is focusing on the vertex and the vectors. And you begin to see that, okay, maybe there's uses for both of these kinds of structures or ideas. And then it helps go back to what you're getting at, Joe, is, well, what's the difference then between solid and
Concrete.
pattern?
Oh,
You can see it visually.
Right. And but that's a direct experience, which is concrete, isn't it?
Well,
I mean, so that
well,
the
but that's
idea
the other
that
thing is to what is the nuance, if you want? What's the difference between concrete and solid? So what do
right.
we mean when we say concrete?
Exactly. And I think deconstructing that is exactly what Bucky was talking about with earlier. What is it?
Yeah, well,
I mean,
what
essentially,
is it?
what are the characteristics of it? So this is kind of the point, is that when you start to understand the characteristics, that then you understand there is no solid, then you understand, well, there are patterns. So I say, what is a Platonic solid? Well, then this isn't correct. Then what I can do is start to understand what it isn't, or what else could be. And so then you understand that, as you just said so beautifully, is using it as kind of a way of constructing things, that so you understand that they're patterns, and
Yeah,
that
so now
it's
you begin
not
to see
that
Platonic
it's not.
solids and Platonic patterns. Yeah.
But that, no, you deconstruct it, and then you start to see that there are patterns and things, and not solids per se. So you have to know what it isn't as well as what it is. So it's kind of, that's where I think the deconstruction kind of comes in, and kind of understanding the concepts. And as we were talking about just a moment ago, with this like idea of concrete, using that term, we can start to ask ourselves, what do we mean by that? And should we even be using patterns or something like that, or connections, or words that are maybe a little bit different? But I don't necessarily, in other words, it's kind of almost like mistake. You say something, and then you go through it and say, oh, well, that doesn't make sense, and then we should probably just go about it from this perspective. So I think it's like kind of exploring in a way. I mean, and this is just a thought. I mean, I'm just thinking this through, is that, even going back to the understanding the characteristics of platonic solids allows you to move away from that mode of thinking. And so that's simply my point. And that's essentially, that was the point that I thought was really what does exist, that Amy put forward in the first paragraph, or that we read, and what are its characteristics, allows us to get to the point of saying what is and what isn't. And yes, maybe correcting grammar from there is important, but I think also delineating the difference between Bucky and traditional forms of thinking is also important as well.
Okay, I'm looking at platonic solids. Okay.
Okay.
And looking at the definition, I was like, what's the cube doing there? And I'm so glad I managed to get this. Yeah. And I can see, the triangles inside here, all the tetrahedrons, right? So it's like, okay. So I had a tough time actually pulling it apart at one point and making any sort of shapes. But now I'm able to put it back into the cube. So without this, I wouldn't have been able to see. So yes, thank you, guys. And one more thing is the idea of, just now the words thingy, the definition. This came about because I was getting my students to write an essay called "A World with No Animals," right? And I realized that, I better check the definition of animals, because exactly, right? And just about animals alone, there are 4 definitions, right? Not about how we use and say someone, you're such an animal, out of that, right? So you're looking at scientifically, there are 4 definitions for animals. One is animals, like mammals or animals with not human beings. Okay, that's one definition. The other is mammals, including us, animals. Then you also have animals that include all insects and birds and the reptiles and so on. So all the categories are all lumped as animals. So I can't recall what the 4th one is, but like literally there were 4 definitions. So when I was marking that piece of work, I had to mark it and accept all, depending on how they use the word animal. So that's my point. So because word usage, we can always add definitions as we discover more things. Just like the mouse was a mouse until it became a mouse with a wire, right? And they just added that in. So we maybe what we can look at is what Bucky talks about, is to add these definitions into the dictionary, so that people can start using them for what they are meant to be, rather than it gets stuck inside a book that most people don't have access to. It's just a thought there.
Yeah, and I think like even this idea that they I forget the exact line that Amy used there, that it is a more accurate depiction of reality, essentially, that these concepts align with reality. Something along those lines she mentioned in that page. That's essentially what we're kind of going for. But again, I think that this is that other point that I was getting to a moment ago, is the delineation of knowing what the underlying concept is by knowing what it's not. And so and even words themselves, what meaning we attribute to them, right? I mean, that is obviously something that's ephemeral. Anyway.
Anyway, what? Are you complete?
No, pretty much. I mean, I was just the only other distinction I would say is the difference between, say, this is one of the discussions I would say with what John was saying in the beginning is something you mentioned about how when you write something down, it can be even worse with the way it can be construed.
Or
And that's
misconstrued.
absolutely or misconstrued. And you talked about being how understood and as you know, as opposed to being misunderstood and miscommunication that goes between, and that was that kind of the how it could be destructive. That specifically, and that's the destruction I was actually even talking about in the beginning. But you write down something that it becomes permanent, and this is one of the things during during coincidentally the Plato dialogues with Socrates talking about the written word, and the written word is has and this is where it could actually be beneficial, and I'll put something actually in the chat about that, is that the written word is something that isn't a dialogue. It's not a living thing. It's not something that is going back and forth. So therefore, the thought is that the written word is dangerous in the sense that it could it can't be interrogated, and so that once it's down, it's permanent. And this is kind of the idea of being permanently written down and misconstrued and misunderstood, and not being able to understand the fundamental what the person really thinks. Where you have a dialogue, it's an ongoing kind of conversation where you can hash out what the idea and what was meant and what was intended by the person that wrote, or speaking a specific word. Now, but there is this other important point that I was making just a moment ago. The written word still allows for an internal transformation, because you actually can not only because you can interrogate yourself. So you're writing something down and you can kind of deconstruct what you thought and compared it to what you are learning, and you're deconstructing what it was, and it leads to this idea of when I say deconstructing yourself, you start to understand yourself. So there's a really interesting paper about this. So even though it becomes, my point being is that if it becomes written down, it's permanent. But that's permanent. But deconstructing it allows you to understand it, so that the idea that it's understood at one point in time, and you can even say that it's concrete, and that you then break it apart. That's how you kind of understand, you can understand the self that way. Yeah, I mean, I didn't explain that beautifully or in the most articulate way, but the concept is kind of like, this is true at this point in time. This is what I thought, and then I can take it back apart and say, okay, this is not true. This is not this is not aligned to reality. This is closer to reality, and that it allows for some internal transformation.
Okay, are you complete?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, good. So Richard, we've kind of like gone in 18 directions from your point. I would love for you to restate your point and just bring me back to what your point was, and you're muted right now. So just restate your point if you could, so I'm very clear on what your point was, because I made a note on it. I want to make sure I have the notes correct.
Well, my point was just reading that sentence about saying there are no solids, and I've seen this many times in Fuller's writings, and I've seen it in the language that speaks to the difference between pre-20th science, the reductionist science that's searching for the ultimate building block, and the quantum sciences that say that whenever you think you're getting close to that building block discovery, that basic solidarity, it disappears from you, and all you see is relationships. And so there's been, from what I could gather, there's been sort of 100 years of a plus now, 125 years almost, of trying to get us to think beyond that former science, that idea of a basic solid. And so I was just raising the question that Bucky makes a statement like that, and then by and large, anybody who reads that kind of statement, whether it's from Bucky or whatever, we gloss over it. We just say, oh, okay, and then that's it. And then we carry on using the language of solidarity as if there are solids. And so I just raised the question in terms of being able to dialogue about if it's true that there are no solids, then why do we keep carrying on as if there are, which just goes back to the other points that John was getting at and Fuller always talked about. If the sun isn't doing the rising and the setting, why do we keep saying it is? And as Bucky used to say many times, he said the best scientists in the world continue to lie to us. And he basically is saying that, and they should be held accountable for that. So now I put it into the world of politics, and especially in North American politics or American politics, and we're going on and on and on about somebody perpetuating the big lie. Well, in some ways, he's not doing anything other than what the science world has been doing for centuries, perpetuating the big lie. So maybe we shouldn't be so hard on the politician that is always out there with the big lie.
Very cool. That's really wonderful. Richard, are you complete? Any other comments or points of information on what Richard? But first of all, Richard, are you complete?
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying and bringing that back and repeating those key words. Any other comments or questions or points on what Richard said?
Yeah, no, I mean, in a way, this is, and I thought about this initially when this whole conversation started to unfold, is this idea that, this is why speech is so important in the sense that when we say something, and this gets to the idea of mystique, and actually, I guess in a way, my opening comments. Somebody will say solid and what that means, but knowing what something isn't is just as important as knowing what something is. So speaking freely that what something is solid and making somebody define that is exactly what allows us to come to a better conclusion and a more accurate depiction of reality. So even a politician that is perpetuating a lie, we know what we don't want. And so, I mean, in a way, that's the interconnection between everything. And that leads to understanding that even people that we disagree with have a value.
Cool. Any comments or points on that? We're about to draw an end. It's close to our time. Maybe it's a good time now for takeaways. And John, you're bubbling here. Why do you start? How are you feeling and what do you
I don't want to open the subject.
What?
I don't want to open the subject of North American politics.
Okay.
I'm being drawn into a swamp.
Yeah, I hear you. So do you want to share your takeaways today? And we'll just pass it along?
I have really enjoyed today. I mean, we've gone back to really, really fundamental things. How we think, the words we use, what we believe, how we educate our children. Whew. And I've enjoyed the journey and I've enjoyed the interaction. It wouldn't have been any fun without the rest of you. And Richard, I fear you're frighteningly accurate and I don't know how to solve the problem.
Right.
We're going to keep lying to ourselves and each other with our language.
Yeah.
It's been a great trip. I've enjoyed it. I've just sent a message saying I won't be here next week. I'll be back in 2 weeks. So yeah, I've enjoyed the journey. Thank you all for your contributions. And how do you feel? What do you take out of today?
Yeah, quite a few things, the one that you talk about the Richard listening and hearing, the differences, and you are using it with for suicide prevention. I'm actually thinking about that, to take it all the way to anyway. And you're absolutely right. Most times we listen, but we don't hear. We don't hear the cries for help. We don't hear the actual messaging that we're supposed to get. And that's really horrifying because most adults don't hear it. Yeah. And then also amongst adults, we don't hear it when we talk to our our family members and friends and so on. And then just wait, let me see Joe, the silence part, and then was it John that you brought in the song? Yes, we forgot.
Yes.
We forgot.
Yes.
That's such a beautiful piece of music. It's not just the song alone, it's the
Yes.
lyrics that go with it,
Yes.
right? So bringing that back, I was like, wow, that's something that we've completely forgotten. And I love the title itself, the oxymoron of it, Sound of Silence. Yep. Okay. The other thing is I wanted to share, because we're talking about language, right? Listening and so on. And yes, John, you're absolutely right. The DISC, more people should know about it. But yes, for us, we're listening, we're dealing with children from the space of DISC and our people, learning styles. We've got the wealth dynamic profiling. Wherever we can, we teach it to our people so they understand where everybody's coming from, the energy level, and how to lower the energy in the students, for the students, and not completely wipe it out. Yeah. Most education systems in Malaysia, what they do is they just control the energy to reduce it down to 0 so they can control the class, right? But it's actually about managing it and raising it, but the kids whose energy is strong, it goes right through the roof. So how do you bring it back down so it remains around here and goes up and down? And then we have to look at, this is all about communication. There are people-centric people, and there's task-centric. Then the information we get from men from Mars, women from Venus, and then the other book, Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps. Have you read that one?
What?
Brilliant. Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps. We have to turn the map around, to get, that book is just brilliant. And then also we think of it that way. And then there's this whole thing with Asian, and then you have East Asian, and you have Western, and local and global, right? So right there is all the in and out, and convex and concave, and micro, macro, expansion. Oh my God, it's all there, and we have to do it all at the same time. Isn't that scary?
Yeah.
It's no wonder why we don't understand each other. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for all that, guys. So Joe, how do you feel and what is your takeaway today?
I mean, I feel very fortunate, you know, um, you know, that I mean, this is something that I think is very important to kind of go through. I mean, I very much actually appreciate at the beginning the emergent design um guide that you had put in the chat, and that was very, very helpful. And so, and Steve, actually, you know, just thinking at things, like thinking from things like I listen, I speak, and or I learn, I teach, I do, and I turned it into what we're talking about is that I listen, I speak, and I act, you know, kind of thing, in the sense that and how that there's a relationship there, and even between the minimum system of idea 4I is the fourth. All right, you have the three and then the four. But anyway, it's but the uh you know, that would, you know, that a way of taking notes and even thinking about things from that perspective, I think is um was helpful for me as well. And then just, you know, kind of just going through uh this exercise. Um Something that I am working on is just the idea of concepts, and uh how to define them. Uh and maybe definition is the wrong word um in and of itself. So how to draw a boundary would probably be essentially maybe even more accurate, uh, because it is drawing a boundary of sorts. And then what does it mean when you draw that boundary? And it means that there are related concepts to that boundary. And then you go through, so you go through the fundamentals of what a concept is, and then you go through and you can decide what the relationships are. So that really kind of gets to what Richard was talking about. And I think by having the dialogue that we've had, that we've really kind of unpacked and gotten a deeper and richer understanding of what of Bucky's concepts, by describing what they are and what they aren't, and seeing the value in both. And I think that's a really holistic way of thinking. And they be, you know, yeah. So I think that that's for me. This is that's been, you know, kind of uh, helpful for me. Is you kind of, and I think that that actually can translate very nicely into ethical principles. So anyway, Richard, how do you feel? What do you take away from today?
Well, I feel pretty good. I always enjoy when this issue of language comes up, and as we were talking about it, it made me wonder whether there's a parallel between the public education around things like anti-smoking or seat belts, and the education of the young people, who then bring the message home to their parents, and actually kind of hold them to the idea that, you know, if you smoke in this house, then there's secondary smoke that affects me, the kid, or if you're not wearing the seatbelt because you've never worn a seatbelt, and the kid sort of, you know, presses you into it. Eventually, we come around to changing our smoking habits and changing our seatbelt habits. And I wish there was some kind of parallel to teaching kids the right language around sunsets and sunrises, and wind sucking instead of blowing, and up and or in and out instead of up and down, and solids and patterns, and then to have them come home and badger their parents into this new way of doing things. That would that would be my biggest takeaway if I ever saw it happen.
Mm.
But if it happened in things like public health, and I just picked the two examples of smoking and seatbelt, I see no reason why it couldn't happen.
Mm.
I mean, can you think? I mean, I picture an army of Anne's students, 1,700 plus, out convincing the adults in their lives that there's different ways of doing certain things. And
Mm.
Pollution right now. That's the one they're redefining.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So where are we? Over to Steve.
Yeah. Wow, this is so amazing, John. I hope you can stick around for just a little while. Anne, you attaching the concept of pollution to this whole conversation is just a major epiphany for me. Listen, you guys, this has been. I'm doing a whole section on my book. Is all about solidification. It's all about sitting in a meditation and allowing the awareness to come around without solidifying, without getting trapped by the first thing the brain thinks about. So tonight has just been epiphany after epiphany after epiphany in terms of giving me language to put in that book. Because I tell people about solidification and go, they don't even get it. And I think I've gotten several handles. Here's one thing I want to share with you because I think this is really powerful. And Richard, the fact that you would bring us back to there are no things, there are events. I thought that was really cool. I underlined it. And we went on down because we were going 90 miles an hour. And all of a sudden you bring us back to it. This is a major epiphany. So you think about the 5 blind men and the elephant, right?
Mm.
Everybody sees the elephant as a thing. It's not a thing. The elephant is an event. Now I know people go, what? The elephant's a thing? Well, I thought of, is a building a thing? Okay, what if that building is made out of wood and you look at this 500 years from now, is that building even present? It's probably dissolved, proving the building is not permanent. It's not solid. It's an event. It's not a thing. It's a thing that is an event. Anyway, and this is something I have a new epiphany I'm adding to this, you guys. This blows me away. You guys, this is one of my elephant analogies. And in my book, I was using this guy here. Here's a thing.
I literally just put that in the chat.
Yeah, this is not a thing. This is an event, and the truth is an event. It's not a thing. And I've been using this one on the left over and over, but I found this guy over here on the right. I'm calling this the BEG, the BEG, right? Anything begs definition. If I see a thing, it's not a thing, it's a freaking event. I'm gonna this. So you guys have just added so much to just being awareness in terms of giving me words to put in the book to communicate this idea of avoid solidification.
Yes.
It's just so exciting. Oh, and here's the other thing. A thing is a thing, but an event requires an observer. All of a sudden, the observer becomes the important aspect because a thing, an elephant, is there whether I observe it or not, right? No, the elephant is an event and it's dependent on an observer.
Yeah.
Well, I've got that down. I wanted to point out, you guys gave Sir Francis Bacon, you attributed him this idea of torturing nature. I checked Wikipedia. Wikipedia took that quote out because they've not been able to find the source. And they gave a couple of other quotes that have been attributed to Francis Bacon. They took them out too. So I just thought I would tell you that so that you don't perpetuate any rumors. Joe, I loved your concept about boundary does not make a thing solid. I love this. And it will go back to a point. And by the way, I'm going back through my epiphanies in reverse order because they kind of are foundational. And one idea was based on the other. Boundaries don't make a thing solid. This goes back to the idea that, okay, this epiphany of a point. Because one of the things I'm doing in my book is I'm doing what I can to explain dimensionality and where dimensions come from and why my brain has two-dimensional eyeballs, 2 eyeballs, so I have 2 dimensions. If I only had 1 eyeball, I'd have 1 even. But 2 eyeballs gives me depth perception, right? And then my brain takes these pictures and and focus, and my brain learns that certain focuses are this far away and certain focuses are this close. So if a lion is 2 miles away, I don't run as fast as if the lion is right here, right? So it's a two-dimensional picture that my brain converts into a 3D reality. And this comes back to the, so thanks, Joe, about the boundary thing. This is really critical. This comes back to a point, and Richard, again, the fact that there are no souls, the fact you brought us back to that blows my mind. And John, you said that it's the perfection model as opposed to the discovery model. I heard protection model, which, by the way, brought me to the #1 problem with human experience, and that is the survival model.
Yes.
Every part of
Oh.
whatever my priority is all about survival. Why don't I care if the sun rises or if the sun eclipses? Because it has nothing to do with my survival. And I think in my book, I'm going to use, I thought you said protection, I'm going to use survival model of communication and come out of survival model and come into, I don't know, something else, maybe discovery model. It's certainly a transition to the reality model. And the reality is things are events subject to an observer, which comes back to quantum theory, which Richard brought us into. And, you know, all the quantum guys, they're only because there's big problems with the quantum guys, because the quantum guys took over universities in the 80s. And if you had an idea that wasn't quantum, it didn't get funded. And so guys like Aaron Weinstein and guys like Stephen Wolfram, they had to go out and get private funding to do their things because there was no institutional funding for anything other than quantum physics. And the big gripe from Wolfram and from Weinstein is that quantum physics is bankrupt because they kept going down, trying to find reality. And they came to super heterotic strings. They came back to vibrating stuff that interrelates. And a thing is simply a bunch of strings vibrating that's dependent on an observer. So this is exciting to me. It was really cool. Now here, and Anne, your idea of logic and grammar, I never understood why I was so weird. I was totally weird. I got a D in philosophy. And I'd go to the teacher, I'd say, teacher, these people contradict themselves over and over again. What Sir Francis Bacon says this, he says this, he says this. Is this the same thing, or is he describing 3 different things? What the hell? And I got this D in philosophy because to me, there was no explicit communication. And it came back to the fact that in high school, I wanted to take German, and my school wouldn't let me take German. I had to take Latin for 2 years. And I thought, oh, what the hell? I'll take Latin for 2 years, and then I'll take German. Latin was a godsend because we had to learn how to structure language. Latin is all about sentence structure. What is a preposition? What's an object? Some languages have objective forms of nouns and some have subjective forms of noun. What is a nominative absolute? If I do not understand the structure of a nominative absolute, I have no way to take a complex sentence and put it in perspective. I just hear idea, idea, idea. I don't hear any priority. If I don't know grammar, I do not know how to structure language. I don't even understand what I'm hearing. And so, and this was I'm going to have to put something about transformational grammar and syntax in my book. I know it's going to blow people away, but if I don't understand the structure of a simple sentence, how can I communicate reality? And now my big epiphany. This was a big epiphany. And who do I attribute this to besides all of you conspiring to blow my mind? I have to, this is Bucky. A point does not exist. What if a point is everything all at once? Because a point is infinite, right? This means it could be infinitely big or infinitely small. I'm going to go with infinitely big. A point is infinitely big. It's the 0th dimension. It's everything everywhere all at once. Now, how do I create 2 dimensions? I don't put a bunch of dots on a line that don't exist and take another dots on a line that don't exist and I put them together and say, I have 2D. I take my 0th dimension, which is everything everywhere all at once, and I fold it. I've now got 2 dimensions. I've done this with you guys before. I take my 1-dimensional plane. This is everything everywhere all at once. I look at it the side. It doesn't exist until I fold it. I now have a perturbation on an energy field, and I now have 2 dimensions. How do I get 3 dimensions? I don't bring in another line that doesn't exist and intersect with those. No, I take this thing and I fold it in such a way that I end up with, I end up with a freaking cube. I now have a cube because I folded one-dimensional space into 2-dimensional space. Then I took 2-dimensional space and folded it into a cube. You have to use a 60-degree angle actually to make this happen. And I haven't figured out how to do it exactly on the first bend. I have one over here that does it. I think this is going to give me a cube. There it is. I took my fold and I folded at 60 degrees. And there it is. Now I have a 3D cube, and it happened from a 0th dimension field that exists everywhere, and I simply perturbate the 0-dimensional field, which is everything everywhere all at once, and I create 1 dimension, then 2 dimensions, and 3. A point is everywhere. It's infinite. It is infinite. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means it exists everywhere, and I can't measure it until I fold it. And then when I start folding, I start being able to measure. And the other thing I want to point out, and it's down here somewhere, I've got all these little zeros of things. We talk about different measurement, and your story about how you send out kids to measure things using whatever they want, and then they bring it all back and they're all excited because it's so many rulers or so many fingers or so many knuckles or so many hairs or so many so many pieces of string, whatever they use, and they come back and realize, geez, it will really be helpful to have a standard unit of measure. Then I can communicate, right? Well, now I'm thinking about Mandelbrot's set. The smaller I measure, the more I measure. The smaller I measure, the more there is. This is critical in mapping and cartography. The smaller I measure, the more I measure. The smaller unit measure, the more I measure. This is inspansion. It's like reality is a funnel going out because it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's a funnel going in. There's more and more and more and more as I get smaller and smaller and smaller. It doesn't go, it goes, and it starts to open up because I inspand my universe by going in. This has just been amazing. I have chills. I've almost got tears in my eyes. You guys are amazing. I'm complete.
Steve, I don't know how you held that back the entire time.
I did.
Yeah, really.
I've been making little circles because I didn't want to interrupt it. Everybody had such important comments. John, did you have something you want to throw in?
No, I'm just saying goodbye.
Okay. Hey, thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for making the time, John. Yeah, I think that this
Okay, everybody. Oh, you're amazing.
It was a good time.
I hope I get to sleep tonight. This is so exciting.
Take care, guys.
You bet.